Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live for what is today? Dr. Ebanks, what's today's date? What is
Today is Friday, April 17th.
Okay, it's kind of hard to keep up when yeah, we're at home doing nothing. So I'm joined um with the MECCA Group as always Fridays at 2, and we're talking about addressing the needs of children with special needs. You want to tell us a little bit more, Dr. Ebanks?
Yes, today we have a MECCA team member. This is Dr. Angelina Norty. She serves as our program manager for school-based services. And Dr. Norty graduated from University of Florida with a PhD in school psychology. Her background and specialty is working with children and adolescents in the school system. Thank you, Dr. Norty.
Thanks, Dr. Norty, for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
So tell us, okay, so we're all stuck at home, and we know the work required sometimes to meet the needs of our special needs children. What are parents experiencing right now during this quarantining, self-isolating experience?
So from supervising my team members, some of the feedback that I've been getting is that many parents are struggling with creating a sense of routine. Some parents may just feel overwhelmed by either providing some sort of, or trying to provide some sort of service. And so many parents are just trying to really figure out what they need to do in order to support their child or their children.
What are some of those things that they're trying to do, or that they some of the support systems that they have at home, who may not, kids spend a majority of their time at school and kids are at home 8 hours, 20, they're home 24 hours. What are some of the things that parents can do now that they have this task of not only being a parent but educator, playmate? What are some things that can happen?
So quite a bit has been written about, the benefit of creating routines. And I know that when some parents hear this, it actually makes them cringe because it just sounds like an extra task to do. But I think that especially for our children who receive special education services, it is important to create some sort of structure for them in their day, just so that they can at least predict what is going to come next. And so even before, creating some sort of list, I think parents can think about a couple different things. One of the first things I think parents can think about is, well, what's important and what's not important? Because sometimes we may just try to be doing too much and there may be some things that we can just put to the side. I also think that considering what the school thinks is effective will help figure out what is important and not, and then the parent also figuring out what kind of time they have, whether their job will allow them certain breaks during the day or not. And so I think those are at least some questions to ask, or parents can ask when figuring out what they need to put in this routine.
So you talked about a routine. Let's talk about that more in depth. Okay. You have 8 hours that most kids go to school. So how do you organize those 8 hours when you may be a parent who also has to work from home? You may have two parents who are working from home. So how do you create a routine and manage your other parts of your life?
So I think in order to do that, right, like the parent would have to look at what resources they have at home and what will work for them. It's really important not to think of or put into place some sort of plan that is just unrealistic for the home setting. And so, just some different areas that maybe a parent can think about is maybe for part of the day, they'll structure that as creative time. And that can look like many different crafts, many different art type activities. They can also create, like an academic time. And this would be the time where some sort of like task that the school is expecting the student to complete will be done. Part of the day can also be just hygiene and self-care, as well as like mealtime, that's important, and snack.
Exactly.
Because I know that some parents have been saying that their children are eating too many snacks. So that can be integrated into the schedule, as well as even some mindful time. And that can look different in each household, but that may also just be some quiet time that will allow, maybe the parent to get some things done that they've been needing to do all day.
So we know that it's important to have routine. What if you have a child with ADHD? While they're at school, there's very specific routines or very specific plans. How can parents adapt those specific routines and plans at home? Can you give us some tips?
Okay. So this has actually been something that I've heard some parents are, trying to gain more information about. And so for many, children who may have ADHD, something that they may struggle with is organization. And so with the organization for something like a young child, for example, we may want to think about, not giving them too many toys at once, for example, because that just may be overwhelming and overstimulating to them. If it's an older child that may have to do some sort of academic task and they don't know how to start it, because initiation is something that children with ADHD struggle with. A parent can maybe sit down with their child and think through the different steps that need to be done, start it with their child, and then as the child completes the remaining tasks independently, give them some sort of praise or some sort of reward so that they're motivated and engaged to keep going on. And those are just two kind of different tips for the different age groups that we have in our schools.
What about just being at home for and keeping, especially children who have ADHD? How can we keep them engaged and you know behaving when there aren't many activities that they can do outside of maybe sitting at home watching TV? They may be able can go outside and walk, but what are some things that just to keep them from going crazy?
Right, good question. So, like a lot of it is finding out. I think this is a good time to find out what the kid may like. Some parents may not really know what their kid actually likes to do. And in order to keep anybody engaged, it has to be enjoyable. And for many kids who do have ADHD, they may, find this time particularly difficult. And so finding out what those enjoyable things are to do, but also giving breaks as needed that don't involve things like iPads and iPhones and things of that sort. So again, it could be if a child likes puzzles, that could be something that they could do during their structured break. If a child likes arts and crafts, that can also be something that they do during their break. But I think it just, whatever it is, it just has to be something that that kid likes to do that's also not draining. Because some of the feedback that I've been getting is that many children are actually feeling drained by having to sit in front of the computer all day to get their education. So just something that, boosts their energy back up. And sometimes that might be something like a dance party. That
Nice. Yeah, definitely a dance party. Who wouldn't want a dance party? A dance break, and that's a great way to break up the monotony, the routine, kind of sitting in front of a computer. I think even for adults, I don't think really prepared, and many aren't prepared to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a
Yeah,
day and doing every activity, including social activities.
right.
So it's important that, the dance parties, the
Yeah.
breaks, it's just not children who are experiencing this, but adults need to, it may be something that you guys can partner, and do just to have a little fun and break it up.
Yes, definitely. I think that fun piece, that enjoyable piece is going to be really critical. If someone has a yard too, they can also go outside and do something that is safe, but also fun and engaging. So definitely.
So when we talk about other diagnoses and, oppositional defiant disorder, some emotional, um, diagnoses,
Hmm.
how do you manage that at home? That
Hmm.
those kind of conditions at home as a parent
Hmm.
when you may not be trained,
Hmm.
like having you or a
Hmm.
special educator. Um,
Hmm.
how do you manage that at home?
Right. So I think for every child, it's going to be different, depending on what the concern that the child presents with at home. For something like an oppositional defiant disorder, that definitely goes back to the idea of routines, and the idea of just having really clear expectations of what is expected, as well as a clear understanding of, what are the consequences for, someone who may be experiencing a heightened level of anxiety, which is pretty common. A lot of adults are also experiencing, challenges with anxiety during this time. I think that a lot of what a parent can do is, have like just developmentally appropriate conversations with their child about how hard this is, like, so to normalize, their emotion, and that to also say that I as an adult may also be experiencing this too. And so I really just think it depends on what is happening, and that will dictate what the approach is.
Right. I think sometimes I've seen people really underestimate, like, the situation that we are
Mhm.
in, and
Mhm.
it's definitely, anxiety inducing. What about parents who, they send their children to school and they don't really spend that much time outside of the household, and now they're charged with educating their children, and they're finding that, wait a minute, my kid has an emotional problem or my kid has a learning disability.
Mhm.
Um, what what do parents do in this instance? How can they be helped, by maybe the MECCA group, or, what do they do if they're just now discovering, wait,
Right.
something's happening with my child?
Right. So I think that a lot of that is going to happen now, where parents are just noticing things about their kids that they probably didn't notice before, just due to increased time or just, the unusual situation with all of this. But I think the first thing that they can do is whatever they're noticing is a concern, to write that down as an observation. And then with those notes that they have, they can then contact somebody at the school. And different schools have different setups, but if it's something that's specifically like academic related, they may want to email the teacher or call the teacher, or, some schools are doing Zoom, Google Hangout or whatever. So if they have those notes, they can then clearly communicate their observations to a teacher. Some schools also have like a counselor's department, and they can reach out to the counselor department or the school social worker, or whatever would be the equivalent in their setting, to say, hey, I'm noticing these things. Is there somebody available to support? And what I found is that in this situation, schools are making different staff available in their schools to be able to support the families in different ways. As well as if the parent wanted to seek some additional treatment outside of the school, they could also contact places like the MECCA Group or any other places to get some either individual counseling or family counseling, or whatever would be decided as being the most appropriate.
So there are health resources out there and help resources for individuals. Dr. Ebanks, did you have something to say?
Yes, I certainly will follow up with what Dr. Norty suggested, is that the parents should contact the schools to see whether or not they have already partnered with an agency like the MECCA Group. We work with a number of charter schools that have us provide services through telehealth. As well as the schools themselves might have already their school counselors or their school social worker to provide crisis intervention or to be available. So I would say the first thing is to contact your school, express your concerns, and see what recommendations and what they already have in place. And then if not, they, again, could look at finding additional resources through their pediatrician for recommendation, or other listings through their insurance company. The MECCA Group, we do provide telehealth therapy.
It's not uncommon for there to be a rush to diagnosis or rush to problem diagnosing for a child. How do we know, Dr. Norty, if it's a real problem or your child is just angry, upset, anxious, or just tired? How do we know? How can we distinguish the difference? And what should we look for before we contact these agencies?
So I would say that it will probably not, it's not necessary for a parent to try to diagnose their child. That is, something that could definitely be left up to a professional. Whether it be a professional at the school or a professional in the community in some way. I think it really is, if the parent is noticing something that is concerning to them, they should definitely report that as they see it. It's also important when reporting to note a timeline if there is one. So for example, if the parent has only noticed these concerns during COVID, then that's what they should report. If the parent has noticed that this has been happening for maybe the last year and maybe it's gotten worse or maybe it stayed the same, those pieces of information would be helpful to a professional who would then, either provide some sort of brief treatment or conduct some sort of evaluation if they thought it warranted that. And with all that information, in addition to whatever would be collected, then they would figure out if a diagnosis is warranted or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, to reinforce the journaling and the documentation is very important. So you kind of keep a log to see regarding the frequency, how long perhaps a tantrum or an episode is happening, what's happening before or after the, let's say, a tantrum, making sure to see if certain behaviors are age appropriate, in terms of developmentally for the child. And a parent may not understand all of that. And again, because of the situation, the parent has to evaluate their emotional state too, to see whether or not they're heightened or perhaps their reaction to a situation might have contributed to how the child might have responded and vice versa. And seeing whether, again, it's an isolated situation or is it being, repeated? Is this a pattern that has been occurring and is becoming, troublesome?
So it sounds like it's really about parents observing and also keeping records, observational records of what's happening, the period of time that it's happening, and what's happening either with the child or even the parent, as Dr. Ebanks says. What are the conditions that surround the behavior? Some good stuff for parents. Parents are going to be starting becoming investigators, like what's happening in my household. What can parents do to facilitate kind of this new transition to a new norm for their children?
So I think in order to facilitate, this change, I think lots of conversations are just necessary. Checking in with themselves, but also checking in with their child. And just taking it taking it slow and easy. If a child, I think, has a question about when it's going to be over, when can they see their friends, I think it's really important to be honest, and, you know, express the uncertainty of the situation, and not make promises that we may not be able to keep, but also not to brush the child's question off, because those questions are actually really valid. And I think that, you know, if, let's say, a parent was to create some sort of routine and it's changeable every day, they could do something like include a, you know, like a family morning meeting in the, you know, in the routine. And in there, they can just talk about how people are feeling, what people are thinking, if anyone is tired, all of those types of questions. And I think as long as a child feels that they are supported in some way, and that they are safe in some way, in, you know, being able to speak to their parent, I think that would help to facilitate this process of transitioning to this reality that we're in right now.
We talked about creating a schedule for those parents who are super parents, who have everything scheduled, who have, you know, breakfast, dinner, lunch, you know, events scheduled. How can they make this adjustment to now? Is it okay not to be perfect during this time?
Absolutely. I think that is major, because I think if not, there will be even more anxiety to the situation. I think part of even creating the routine is also accepting that some days the routine may just need to go out the window. Um,
Yeah.
Trying to force it will make things in the household more stressful. And so I think it really is okay to not be perfect, really ever, but especially during this time.
Yeah, I can hear a lot of parents with a sigh of relief and saying, okay, I don't usually allow you to watch television for 3 hours. Today you get six, you know, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to relax my screen time rules, because we're all dealing with transition. We're all dealing with flexibility and changes, and some things happen and some things don't. And
Right.
I think that's important that we teach as a life skill, about flexibility. Don't you agree, doctor?
Definitely. I think flexibility is going to be the skill that is going to get a lot of us through this current situation. And so definitely flexibility, every chance that we can practice it, I think will make us all better in the end.
So there are different situations across the country with this quarantine. Some, you have two-parent households, you have single households, you have extended family members. And at some point in some households, a member has gotten sick and they had to be either placed outside of the home or quarantined in a separate part of the house. How do you deal with that and explain to children that they won't be in contact with a relative, or that their relative may be in the hospital for an extended period of time? How does a parent explain that, and how do they help their children, especially children with special needs who may not understand the intricacies of why your parent's not here? How can you help? What are some tips and that you can help parents explain some of the changes that happen during this pandemic?
Mm-hmm. So with that, and again, I think it would depend on the child's developmental level, what they can understand about emotions. But if it was something that could be communicated verbally, emotions such as sadness, recognizing maybe there's inherent grief in maybe not being able to see this particular family member for extended period of time, as well as I think a lot of it is really um, teaching to be okay with not being okay. I think that really would be important. If it's a child who maybe is on a different developmental level, maybe using lots of pictures for them to communicate how they're feeling. It can be drawings. It could be other ways of expressing themselves using art. That could also help them. And even for someone who you know, has a higher developmental level, they can also use art to maybe express their feelings, with some of the different things that they may be experiencing within their home.
So, I mean, I like the great thing that you brought up grief and talking about that, but you don't actually have to lose a person to experience grief. Can we talk about like loss in terms of loss of seeing friends on a regular basis, loss of maybe if you're a senior or those monumental kind of events that happen towards the end of the year. Can we talk about how can you help your child deal with grief and loss of just what we're the norms that we're used to?
Mm-hmm. So I think that for students who may have special needs as well as students who do not, I think that this is just becoming a reality for a lot of people, including adults. And so a large part of it in either dealing with it and or facilitating it is just recognizing the different emotions that it can come with. And so one day that may look like sadness. Another day that may look like denial. Another day it may look like anger. And so those are all different ways that it can look in terms of helping to navigate that process. Perhaps working with the student to figure out or think of some other ways to celebrate something. Let's say like a prom is canceled. Is there another way to celebrate that would also be meaningful in some way? Is there something virtual that can be put together? Is there some sort of mementos that could be created that would also give that particular student, as well as whoever else they may have been interacting with, some sort of satisfaction, at least for the time being, and then potentially planning for something in the future. I know I've read a lot of how, some people are planning events, way in the future because they can't do it now. And so I think it really is, again, going back to that idea of flexibility, thinking outside the box a little to see what would feel good.
I've seen a few events online and on television of parents who have planned proms or videotape proms on TikTok. They all dressed up and they had a prom at home, which is, I think, is even more fun than actually having to go out and spend money. But I know everyone is different, so
Right.
I would prefer a home prom. But I like the idea about being creative and using what you have at home. When it comes to, there's been talk about transitioning back to, a little bit of getting outside the house, canceling the quarantine slowly. What about the anxiety around that? Just getting back to the old normal, which is really a new normal. The anxiety of going out into public spaces with the unknown. How do you navigate that with your children?
So I think you alluded to it, and I think a big idea is that when things do start to open up and it is safe again to be interacting with folks, that the world in which we know it in many ways is going to be different. And so I think having conversations around that idea of this new reality that we're going to be living in, I think that's an important foundational step. Moving forward, I think many of the practices that we have, started now with hygiene and just, maybe having wipes and things of that sort, I think it helps people to feel calmer to know that if I am in some situation where maybe, I need to sneeze or something of that sort, at least I have some sort of material or resource to help me in this way. In terms of going into larger events and in buildings and things of that sort, I would just, really advocate to know what those policies are, to understand the things that they're doing to ensure safety. And I think those are at least some things that can be done. But I think a lot of it will be changing as we figure out what it looks like, again, as we interact with people.
Now, I don't really know what's happening with schools in terms of providing special services and special needs services. What do you think the role of teachers right now is for helping students um, distance by distance learning. How can teachers be more available or more helpful or benefit those who are not showing up daily to class now?
So I think right now, different schools learning looks different in different schools. Different schools have different policies by which the teacher, is expected to follow. I think that in cases where a student is not showing up to school or not logging on or things of that sort, I think that what teachers are already doing is, especially if the child is a minor, is getting in contact with the parents, trying to understand maybe is there a lack of resources in the home, is the child unmotivated, and I think that that is the best that the teacher can do. I think the teachers are also collaborating a lot with either their parent coordinators in their school, or they're also coordinating with the school social workers to try to get those who are maybe less engaged to be more engaged. And so I think the collaboration within the school and with different school staff members is what is going to get more students engaged if there are some who are not.
It's a lot to do when you're not interacting with your students on a daily. Let's talk about, I mean, for professionals who are, again, away from students, um, what are some of the things that they should communicate to parents? Should they be reaching out to talk about, some of the tips and tricks and, coping strategies? Um, should they just wait until parents reach out? How should professionals interact with parents?
So I think a
Or
lot.
what do you think?
I think that at least from what I know, many of the teachers have been proactive in contacting parents. And a lot of the teachers' focus is actually on the learning piece. And so a lot of teachers are focused on, well, how can I continue to deliver this content in this very different way than usual? Um, and so with that being said, I think that the teachers are doing, what I would think a teacher would do in terms of sharing coping strategies and things of that sort. I think that the mental health professionals in the school would probably be better equipped to share that information.
Yeah, I agree. So are there any final tips for parents to consider um, for children with special needs, Dr. Norty?
So I think a big one would be the routine, but also allowing flexibility and failure in that routine. I think the second big tip would go back to finding just what is pleasurable, what is enjoyable. And then I also think that if there are certain let's say triggers, for example, sensory input that a student responds really strongly to be able to identify that trigger and to try to eliminate it as much as possible within that particular setting.
I think those are good tips. Dr. Ebanks, you have something?
Yes, I certainly agree with Dr. Norty and her tips. I would also advise parents to, if they do have a child who is diagnosed with a learning disability or social and emotional disorder, to refer back to their IEP. Parents receive a copy of the evaluation and the IEP plan for their child, which is the individual education plan for their child. And that is a good time to go over it, as well as contact the teachers and ask them, what does this mean? How does this look? How can I help my child? So, and that's where the teachers and the school psychologists, the whoever, did the evaluation, the school counselor or the school social worker can give specific tips, because the IEP plan has specific goals and objectives. So that can help a parent to understand perhaps a little bit more on how to address, for example, time management, or, understanding, a particular math concept. They can actually see how to, deliver it. And they need, because parents are not trained to be teachers. There isn't that. So go to the professionals. This is a perfect time to build that relationship even stronger between the teachers and the administration and, other school personnel.
I think, Dr. Ebanks, to that point, there is an inherent stress in having to step up to a role that you're not trained to do. And so using those resources and contacting people who are trained, and who are available, even in this pandemic, to help assist, is one of those things that we should all take heed and do. Don't you agree, Dr. Norty?
I didn't hear you. Did you say something?
Oh. I thought my computer froze. I think it's appropriate to reach out for those resources. Don't you agree?
Oh, yes, definitely. Because I think especially during this time, schools want to do the most that they can do to support their children and families. So definitely reaching out to the professionals, using those resources like Dr. Ebanks said, IEPs, including 504 plans as well.
Yes.
Behavior plans, functional assessments. If any of those things exist, this would probably definitely be a good time to collaborate and better understand what those documents are.
Yeah, certainly. Like Dr. Norty again said, regarding even up, if you have a child with autism, or is already a set behavior plan, learning how to use some of those applied behavioral analysis, skills at home, those training, those techniques, how to incorporate a level system, in your home, green means go, or, yellow means, stop and think. And, how can you adjust and modify what was happening at school to home? So again, because even when the students transition back to school, that communication is going to be very much needed. That continuous conversation between teachers and parents, and continuing to build that relationship between them to know what has been happening the last few weeks. So that documentation, the journaling, and we know it's very tasking, for parents right now. We also, appreciate the teachers so much for all that they have done, and they're continuing to be there. And they're in a very difficult position, now, because it's wanting to help their students from afar, and now parents are having to grasp all of these concepts all at once. So just continuing to support one another, be patient with one another, appreciate one another. I think those are, excellent things, as my children are in the background. It's Friday. Fun Friday has started.
Fun Friday is on.
Yes, and humor is important.
Yes. And also to add on to that, if a student is receiving like OT services, speech services, or behavior support, those are also people from either the school or people who work with the school that are providing services that the parents can also collaborate with.
Yes.
Up to either get strategies to how to better work with their children at home.
Yes. And the schools that we work with, we have been able to continue to provide those services to the students, and communicate with parents and communicate with teachers about the students' progress. So again, finding out who is your school partnered with.
I think I hear from both of you is that use the resources that are available, have fun, be flexible, and pretty much don't expect things to be perfect. Am I right? Is that something that parents should take away from this broadcast?
Yes, certainly. Be patient. This is the time that's patient. Flexibility, is so important with everyone. This is, it's once in a lifetime, hopefully, we all hope. And we're going to all learn from this. I think this has been an opportunity to really sit back and appreciate everyone's role that have been underappreciated, everyone's role. And to think differently and to be grateful, and to be also helpful to others that might be struggling. If you have a friend who has a parent who has a child with special needs, call them, ask them how they're feeling, how they're doing. Do a Zoom meeting, FaceTime the child, just to give that parent a break. This is an opportunity to be able to reach out. Even children who have special needs need to continue to socially engage with their friends. So use other platforms so that they can even if they're looking at each other, help them to learn how to play a game, online or something. That is very important.
I think
The social engagement part.
I think what you said, we don't know how important people are until they are essential.
True.
And we've seen a lot of essential people in our lives: the grocery store workers, the teachers, the post office workers, the delivery men. Everyone is essential in our lives, and we don't recognize it until actually we have to need them for everything. So I think this is, to your point, a great opportunity to applaud those people, recognize who they are, and shout them out, reach out to them, give them support. We all need each other. And as much as we need each other, technology, as you just said, can facilitate those connections. Dr. Norty, going back to what Dr. Ebanks said about having students with special needs connect, and they still need that behavioral kind of piece, that interaction. What can parents do to facilitate? How can they facilitate connecting with others, connecting with their peers during this time?
So I definitely think there are virtual games that are available. Many of them are free. There are even some that used to have a cost, but now due to COVID-19, the programmers have made them free. So, just doing a Google search and finding some of those, that helps also with the play piece, which is important for students depending on what their diagnosis is. Using platforms such as the one we're using for folks to continue to connect with each other. I think all of those are really good to, facilitate that social piece during this time.
Dr. Ebanks, where can parents reach out to you, the MECCA Group?
They can certainly contact us by calling 202-529-3117. Also to look at our website, the MECCA Group LLC.com. And if we're not the provider for you, there are also other resources. We certainly encourage parents to speak to their pediatrician, to contact their insurance carrier, to look at resources such as Psychology Today, or DC Psychological Association. There are a number of ways to find services.
Well, I feel good. I don't have any kids, but I feel better prepared if I did. I hope you guys are staying well, and your families are staying well, and your friends. And thank you so much for providing some tips for parents on dealing with their children during this extraordinary moment in history. And hopefully they can take some of these tools and tips and strategies and dance party ideas and create something that works for right now until we get back to a new normal that works for everyone.
Certainly.
I hope you have a great Friday.
Thank you. It's Fun Friday.
Fun Friday.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Norty.
No problem.
Thank you, Brandon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.